I'm here today talking about design because design is my Trojan horse into the whole world of creativity, but we could be talking art. We're in the family here. We don't have to really look at different labels. What I would like to talk to you about anyway today is our near future. I'm not a futurologist. I've never been able really to talk about the future, but I see just a few hints and I try to make them mine, make them yours, and I try to show them to the world. And what I see right now is three main areas that are of interest to me and that I would like to explore more using quantum as a guideline. You know, civic entanglement, the fact that now more than ever we see artists and designers being really overtly, unashamedly interested in politics. I'm just coming back from the opening of the Venice Biennial of Art. There was a refreshingly, wonderfully, rivetingly political exhibition this year, and so much so that a few people from the art world were irritated by it. I like it when that happened. Then creative encoding. You know, we're talking about poetic computation here, and that kind of poetic computation is not only in the digital realm, it's also in the biological realm. I really love the fact that coding, the idea of being able to jumpstart instructions and algorithms, is really pervading so many different fields. And last but not last, incubating the arts, what curators like me and like many others are doing to incubate new forms of art and make them become a kind of a platform in museums and in other institutions for the world at large. Quantum computers. Do I know how they work? No, nobody really does. And I love how scientists, you know, scientists are also kind of at a loss, but they work at really, really cold temperatures. You can't touch them because the moment there's like even the slightest disturbance, they go completely awry. They look like something like this, but I'm not really sure that this picture is really true. And I love this article. Miranda Tremiere wrote this beautiful article in the New Inquiry 3 years ago that was completely speculative about quantum computers, but she was so obsessed and she wanted to go and get to see one. And there's very few that are really operative. So she started dating this guy that had access to the one at Yale just for that. And then he sniffed her out, so she didn't get to see that computer. It doesn't really matter. But what I loved is that in this beautiful article, she wrote, look at this, you know, she wrote that piece, but look at what pops out. Delicate quirks and unpredictability, the efficacy of ambivalence or ambiguity, my heart beats faster. Ambivalence and ambiguity are smart collaborators that not only share their uncertainty, but sharpen it into a precise mode of communication. How wonderful. That's where we want to be, right? And that's where we are. And quantum design can be seen in these two different, the difference between these two set of robots, of speculative robots. Up on top, you see Bob de Graaf, old school robots. They're there to take care of us. You know, like, what was her name in the Jetsons? You know what I'm talking about. Just take, Rosie, thank you so much. Taking care of us, always predictable, always dependable. And instead, Dan and Raby's robots, quite the opposite, neurotic, demanding, needy. They're not going to do anything for you until you cuddle them, look at them in the eyes, eliminate magnetic fields, and then only then will they perhaps start collaborating with you. So it really is difficult to know what design can bring when it's inspired by this kind of quantum mechanics. But civic entanglement, you know, civic entanglement is this need to not only be political, but also understand politics at a much broader level. When I started at MoMA 21 years ago, one of my first, proposal for acquisitions was a Beretta. You know, here I come from Italy. Design is form follows function. In this case, the Beretta is a beautiful function, a beautiful form, right? I mean, not very beautiful function, but the form was beautiful. And I was very proud because I had heard that it had been adopted by the New York Police Department. And all of a sudden, I get told, no, 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 we do not collect guns. And I'm like, why don't we collect guns? Because what you see is what you get in the design department. Form indeed follows function. Therefore, the function of a gun is to kill. Therefore, it cannot be part of the collection. And I said, but there's a lot of of it in the art, in the painting and sculpture collection. Oh yeah, but that's a metaphor. That's a means to an end. So I started thinking about it, and recently I bumped into this amazing video. George Nelson, you know George Nelson, staple of the history of American design, in 1960 did this amazing video for CBS on how to kill people. And he said that killing people was a problem of design, and it's very subtle, you should see it, because it is not at all ironic, but because it's not ironic, it's devastating, and I'm sure that his intention was the opposite of what might seem. So this kind of ambiguity and ambivalence is extremely interesting, and when you look at objects like this, the ambiguity and ambivalence and the tension between the goal and the perfection of the design is something that still bugs me a lot, so much so that when a more ambivalent and ambiguous feat happened a few years ago and the 3D printed gun was announced, I almost had a crisis of identity. I'm kidding, but I was really stunned, not only by the 3D printed gun, but my own reaction to it. My own reaction was one of disbelief. How can it be that something as benign as a 3D printing machine, and how can it be that design can go so wrong, and open source and everything that I stood for? And then 5 minutes later, I had a bad reaction to my own bad reaction, saying, you're really silly, you're a Pollyanna. Design can go wrong, it has gone wrong, it will go wrong, and it's better we all, as designers, start thinking about it, because we tend to always highlight the benign aspects of it. And at the same time, also, Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, was published, and it's a book that argues that our society is becoming less violent. And indeed, it's becoming less violent in certain aspects of violence that are millennia old, but there are new subtle forms of violence that perhaps he does not take into account. And so I started thinking about it and thinking of looking at the world in the only way that I know how to do, through objects of design. And I started making a collection of objects that have an ambiguous relationship with violence and putting them together in a line. Then, of course, I co-opted my partner in crime, Jamer Hunt, who is a fantastic curator, and we started putting together a proposal for an exhibition. We proposed the exhibition. It got rejected because maybe it was not such a good idea to have a whole room or galleries filled with like plastic handcuffs and AK-47s and euthanasia roller coasters, but we decided not to throw away this idea and to make it happen online. And this is the Design and Violence site that has been going on for the past 2.5 years. Every week we've been, no, 1.5, sorry. Every week we've published a different object that has an ambiguous relationship with violence. You see a few there, from Natalie Jeremijenko's and Chris Wobkin Beetle Wrestler, that enables a human being to be scaled down to the scale of a beetle, and the beetle is the strongest animal in nature, so you can kind of arm wrestle with a beetle, to the AK-47, to the teardrop tattoo. You know, just all of these different objects that symbolize violence, that are not necessarily aestheticizing it, but rather bring us on the brink of what it could be. And it was really fantastic because every week we had a very authoritative person write about it. We were able to get at the beginning some really generous authors, like Anne-Marie Slaughter was the first, she's always the best, and then William Gibson also started this whole trend, and then we were able to make this avalanche happen. But what I find really fantastic is that what happened because of a rejection became actually a strength. I don't think we would have been able to have this happen in the white box. You know, we were talking before about beyond the white box, thinking out of the white box. Well, this kind of curatorial experiment is, to me, a brand new way for my own experience to be able to communicate to the public. You know, there were so many different topics that we were able to tackle, from, you know, the role of women in Muslim countries, especially during the Arab Spring, to how political ads can lie overtly because they're not about truth in advertising, but rather about freedom of speech. So this beautiful website that collects untruthful, overtly misleading ads, political ads, is incredible. Or the Nirbhik pistol, which is a pistol that is manufactured and produced by the Indian government to be distributed to women so they can defend themselves from rape. So that's the solution, in a way, a form of violence. Or the plastic handcuffs. And in the case of the plastic handcuffs, we had Judge Shaira Scheindlin write the piece. She is the woman, the judge, the hero that declared stop and frisk unconstitutional in New York 2 years ago. So serious matters talked about by serious people. And it's funny how Zach was talking about asking the right question. At the end of every essay, we asked a question. Is execution always ugly? Is euthanasia a form of violence or a form of compassion? Can we design a violent act to be more humane? Questions are so important for us today, and the answers were fantastic. You know, the box cutter, for instance, that's become such a symbol of violence for Americans after 9/11, led to the question, which other invisible everyday objects can become lethal weapons? And not all the contributions were text. You know, we have here, you hear Jad Abumrad, who contributed this beautiful piece that's made only using bees' sounds. And it's almost ominous, you know, it's almost like a scary, threatening sound. And then on the left-hand side, you said Christoph Niemann and his GIFs that are about war by extracurricular means. The book, the project right now is becoming a book, because after rejecting the project, the exhibition, MoMA decided the website was great and wanted to also make a book. So it's really post-digital. The book is coming out next week, I think, and then we also had a few pieces in the gallery. And what I really love is that we also had these live debates, like Oxford-style debates, really serious. We had one about the 3D printed gun, but the motion was not about gun control. The motion was about open source. And Cody Wilson, the designer of the 3D printed gun, was arguing for the motion, which open source has to remain completely free no matter the consequences. And instead, against him, argued Rob Walker. And I don't know how many of you know the wonderful Rob Walker. He looks and sounds like the crypto-anarchist much more than Cody Wilson. And it was a fabulous conversation. We had one about empathy. We had one about killing animals. And next week, we're going to have the last one, closing of the whole project. We're going to have Biela Coleman and Larry Lessig talk about the open internet. So it's become a platform for so much, but what is most moving, I think, and what really is enabled by the platform of the web, is that we were able to talk about really serious matters and to get out of the normal white box that is the museum audiences and people that are experts in design. So you see here, this is the Euthanasia roller coaster, which is a speculative project by an RCA graduate that is a roller coaster that progressively deprives your brain more and more of oxygen, and at the end of the roller coaster, you're dead. So in a way, it's about dying gently or in a kind of elating way. And the question that we ask is euthanasia a form of violence or a form of compassion? One of the comments that we got was from somebody that actually is in constant pain, and she was saying, you know, to some people think that death is necessarily a tragedy, but sometimes life is a tragedy. So when you get answers like that, you realize that finally you've been able to break the white box, that finally art, a museum, the kind of cultural institution can be a way to talk about really serious matters. You also realize weird things. If you look at these two posts, one is the Serpentine Ramp by Temple Grandin, the redesign of the slaughterhouse, and the comment was by Ingrid Newkirk, the president of PETA. On the right-hand side is our last post of two weeks ago about the death penalty and the lethal injection. And the commentary is by Ricky Jackson, who's been recently exonerated after 39 years on death row. So, excuse me, two serious matters. Look at this. 124 comments about killing animals, 2 comments about killing human beings. So interesting. You know, you get to understand so much more about people and about your audience by doing experiments of this kind. But, you know, so That was about the civic entanglement, being entangled with the world and being more politically engaged. Creative encoding is about instead trying to help mutations and direct them in the right possibilities, as a curator. MoMA has been doing that for quite a while, studying all this different kind of creative encoding. You see there in the background, mutant materials in contemporary design. Well, that's I just wanted to celebrate something with you, because in 2 days it's going to be the 20th anniversary of the MoMA website, which I coded by myself. Yeah, I learned HTML. It's pretty horrible. You still have it here. You can still get on it, but it's great. It has the whole checklist. But so already this idea, in that case, the idea was the materials at last could be customized and kind of designed by the designers themselves. So designers didn't have to go to a chemical engineer or to a scientist to change the nature of materials. They could do it in their own studios, because new resins enabled them to fine-tune better, and new composites. So it was about giving the tools to designers. And you see the next step is giving the biological tools to designers. And you see in Design and the Elastic Mind, where we had some of the great work by so many of you here and so many of the people that were in the conference in the past few days, we also had some of the first biodesign works. And then a colleague of mine, William Myers at MoMA, did the book Biodesign, and we started really going down that path of biodesign and synthetic biology as forms of creative encoding. The work of Symbiotic, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, great designers and artists based in Perth, Australia, that kind of launched this whole biodesign and bioart movement many years ago. We had in the exhibition Design and the Elastic Mind that victimless leather, that little leather coat, it was just this big, that was made of mouse stem cells that scared the bejesus out of everybody at MoMA. I didn't tell them while we were putting it in that it was live, and it was an incubator. And then at some point I had, it was growing too fast, and the designers were back, this is a funny story, but the designers were back in Australia, and it was growing so fast, and the sleeve was dangling, and it was getting bigger, and so I asked them, what do I do? And I said, oh, Paola, you have to stop it. I'm like, excuse me? Yes, yeah, you turn it off, just turn off the nutrition. I'm like, no, I can't. I mean, that would be killing it. And I said, no, Paola, it's never been alive. It's a semi-living. I'm like, it is alive. So all of a sudden, all of your more deep-seated convictions and all of your coolness just go down the drain, So I love this kind of reaction that one can have when different worlds collide, right? And right now, in 2 weeks, I will propose for acquisition. This is a secret, don't tell anybody, because I'm not supposed to say what I propose for acquisition beforehand, so it's only between us. The Autodesk 3D printed virus. I'm going to see. They might say no. My committee might say forget about it. But we are at the point that we can, of course, we've been able to design viruses forever, but we can 3D print them. And Andrew Hessel here, who's the scientist in residence at Autodesk, has been arguing also about the moral implications of it all. He wrote a beautiful piece for The Atlantic a few years ago about hacking the president's DNA. And he's been talking really, like other designers, about the possible consequences of this kind of creative encoding. You see here the speculative work of Susana Soares, but there's many others. She says personalized bioweapons are a subtler and less catastrophic threat than accidental plagues or WMDs. Yet, they will likely be unleashed much more readily. So it really is an issue that we have to tackle as designers and as artists. And I like the work of designers like Revital Cohn and Tur van Balen that always have a beautiful way to show the possibilities. In this particular case, they took the kingyo, which is the goldfish that has been hybridized by Japanese culture for a very long time, and have created a machine with which you can print goldfish that have no sexual reproductive organs. So they cannot reproduce. They are live beings that are meant to die at some point and that are completely commodified. And they designed the machine so that it can produce only a batch of 40 and then it can never work anymore. So they want to do it only once to demonstrate, but then no more. I like the fact that there's so much work of this kind going all the way to the extremes Of course, you know about Stuart Brand and Ryan Phelan's experiment now about de-extinction. He wants to bring back to life animals that have either long gone or just not so long gone. They want to start with the passenger pigeon that used to be the most normal bird in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century and is now completely extinct. So this kind of creative encoding is at the same time a way to really redefine reality and also a way to understand more about our own nature. And it is important for curators and for institutions to incubate these new types of art and design that help people really understand better what the future can be. Museums like MoMA, museums like the new museum with the new ink, museums like SF MoMA, so many museums in the world are now trying to really give a platform for this new type of art and this new type of design. And, you know, at MoMA, I've been discussing it for quite a while also with the Department of Research and Development. Believe it or not, MoMA has an R&D department, which I founded. It's a lot of R and very little D, because it's half of me and one 12-month intern. But we started 3 years ago, and the R is really good. And one day we'll be able to do the D. So MoMA Research and Development, it's almost like a little bit of a reality check and a conscience tool for MoMA. What I'm really concerned about, but I don't talk about it too overtly because people think that I am a little freaky, is survival, frankly. I mean, museums have to entangle themselves more with people's needs and reality in order to survive. Not historical museums, too historical to fail museums like the big British Museum, Louvre, or the Met. Those are not in danger because they really preserve the patrimony of humankind. Not science museum because it's proven that they are necessary to the basic curricula for education. And not community museums, because they have this kind of buttressing function that is truly important. But museums of modern and contemporary art, especially when they're not able with their art to communicate directly their importance and their necessity, they need to think about how to communicate what they do. So MoMA R&D is about that, and we have been conducting these salons that are now online, if you want to see them on the website. They're quite great, that are about topics in which the museums has some kind of expertise, but they're also very relevant to the outside world, from philanthropy to taboos to copyrights to the move. We had a series of 3 salons. One was the object online, from physical into digital. The other was the object offline, from digital to physical, and then the connected object, of course. And it's been really interesting to discuss how museums, or MoMA in particular, can talk about these topics while at the same time collecting and displaying the art of great quality that we want to be associated with and that we want to present to our public. It's nothing new that sometimes curators have to show their trustees and their committee members things that are not necessarily your old type of art, that are not necessarily everybody's cup of tea or comfort zone. You know, we were talking about the Autodesk virus beforehand. But at the beginning of MoMA's history in the late 1920s, the director, the founding director, Alfred Barr, who was 29 when the museum was founded, not 29, in his late 20s, maybe he was 27, but he was in his late 20s, was showing a lot of work that was not necessarily considered art. You know, you see Cubism at the beginning in the United States had a little bit of trouble kind of establishing itself. Of course, years later, when Bill Rubin is talking about a Picasso retrospective in 1980, Picasso is normal. It always takes a while. And that's why, you know, we'll talk about the video games later on. It makes me laugh that people don't have that kind of memory. The first exhibition, the first bona fide exhibition of design was in 1934 by Philip Johnson, this great machine art show in which he took propeller blades and coils and you know, ball bearings, pieces of machinery, and put them on these white pedestals against the white walls, you know, as if they were beautiful Brancusi sculptures. That's the first bona fide exhibition, and it was the beginning of the collection. But Philip had proposed it 4 years ago, and it had been rejected. So the first show that he could do was a show of furniture. So you see, I don't have to complain. It's it's like old history. It always happens. And it happened also to some other great curators like Connie Mildred Constantine, who in the 1960s did a great exhibition on packaging, and packaging at that time was not considered MoMA fodder, or my colleague Kara McCarty, who's now at the Cooper Hewitt, who did this gorgeous show, Diagramming Microchips, Information Art in 1990. And those were the diagrams used by electronic engineers to actually check on the fitness of microchips. So it was really great. And when I found myself trying to include new categories of design into the museum collection after the exhibition Design and the Elastic Mind in 2008, I had a little bit of a hard time, and I had to use a few stratagems to get into the collection visualization design and interfaces and interaction design. But slowly but surely, we've been able at MoMA to make that happen, and we started collecting digital fonts. Of course, fonts we were collecting before, but digital fonts were also a way to show people more about the world and to make them understand how important fonts design is, even if it is one of the most, how can I say, inbuilt forms of design and thus invisible. We started collecting logos and symbols. I mean, the first one was the @ I'm particularly proud of it because if you look at its history, it's everything you dream of in a design object. It's centuries, many, many centuries old, and it's been recuperated today with the same meaning that it had in the Middle Ages. You know, I don't know if you know the story, but the first instances that have been found were handwriting monks, manuscripts. They were using that sign to make a fusion of the two words in the preposition ad, ad, the Latin preposition that meant in relationship with or towards. So they were just like saving energy and just going bloop, you know, with this little curl on top. And it remained throughout the centuries with the same meaning, using by merchants, by accountants, by all sorts of people that dealt with commerce to indicate a relationship between price and quantity, or at the ratio of. So when Ray Tomlinson found himself in 1971 inventing the email program that was part of the internet sponsored by DARPA at BBN, he just looked at the keyboard of the teletype, saw this curl, did a little research, saw what it meant, thought it was perfect to link the name of the person to the name of the machine to just like get rid of all the code in the middle that was always repeating itself, adopted it, and sent the first email to talk about the @ I mean, and it's beautiful, and it's in the public domain. I mean, what more do you want as a curator than an object like this? You know, it was just, I was so happy that this could happen. But the funniest thing is that nobody knew how to deal with the public domain part of it. And when people call us, as they do for other objects, and ask us for images, from the collection, the copyrights and stuff, and they ask about the @ we just tell them, it's on your keyboard, just like push the button. And they're very perplexed. They said, no, it's yours too. Just if you can, use American Typewriter as a font, because it's the one that's closest to the teletype font from 1971. But it's really perplexing, but beautiful, because once they understand it, I feel that they garner a much deeper understanding of design, of art, of public domain, of the importance of design in the world. So lately we've been also acquiring the Creative Commons logo, the Google Maps pin, and I love it, the on-off button. You know, what you see there is the wall, is MoMA seen by from the garden as it is right now. So it's really nice to be able to enter these new types of design and art into the collection. But the video games, which is something that we started collecting about 4 years ago, were particularly interesting and incendiary. To us, that's a no-brainer. I mean, video games are great forms of art, of design, of storytelling, of technology, you name it. They condense so much of what we stand for. And in typical MoMA fashion, we took years before we got to the short list. You know, we put together experts, from video game designers to video game scholars. We talked, we made a short list, we established criteria, and we came down to this list that is, in my opinion, impeccable. And of course, to others it's not, but it doesn't really matter. I'm really proud of it. And my favorite is Tempest. I'm sure you all have your favorites, you know, so it really is quite fantastic. And then we announced it, and I was amazed because the reaction from the community was so positive. You know, we had about 550 comments the first day of the blog post, and only a very small part of those were corrosive and insulting. You know, it's like many were like, "Oh, you forgot my favorite game," and but it was quite fantastic. And so we collected video games as a form of design, of interaction design, not of art, not of film or animation design. Therefore, we tried to adopt criteria that had to do with design and with architecture. You know, space-time architecture is the title of one of the milestones of architectural writing. It's Siegfried Gideon. And we decided that besides space-time and architecture, when it came to video games, we had to add aesthetics and behavior as very important criteria or means to understand the quality of video games for MoMA. But so, considering that, we also went on trying to describe the criteria better. So space, you know, the space in which the game exists and evolves, and that's why sometimes architects are so good and in video game design teams, because spatial performance and the quality of the space is something that is very important when you try to think of a game as a piece of design. Of course, what you're seeing there is one of the few games that we could never acquire because Nintendo was absolutely unreasonable. And so, you know, just like in the typefaces and in digital fonts, there's no Apple. Those are the two companies that did not agree to changing slightly the EULA in order to let MoMA have the game in perpetuity, because you know, that's one of the big problems. It's like EULAs can be revoked. We cannot really have a Picasso ownership revoked, you know, and we consider Pac-Man Picasso. So then time, you know, the time in which the video game happens, you know, sometimes they have their own time, other instances they follow the time in the future. For sometimes they go on forever. I don't know if you heard about Génération, which is this new video game that you will have to leave in inheritance to your children because it lasts longer than human beings. I find it really beautiful. Or in the case of Passage, Jason Rohre's Passage, it's 5 minutes. You are born, you go through life and you die, and there's no second level or second life, and you make choices. You know, if you live your life by your own, you have an easier time, but you die sooner. And instead, you know, so it's really very philosophical. Then, you know, I was telling you about aesthetics. Aesthetics is important, but whenever I say aesthetics, it's not just prettiness. The kind of aesthetic intention that I really love is the one that takes into account the limits of technology. For instance, here in Core Wars, the limitation of the processor made it so that there was an interference, a moment of like scattered interference in the middle that becomes, in the video game designer's mind, a way to create an interesting obstacle that makes the game even more challenging. And then, of course, behavior. And this is one of the most interesting parts. I told you before, no guns and no weapons in the MoMA design collection. You can have it in the art collection, painting collection, because they're metaphors, but not in the design collection. In the case of video games acquired as design, we had the same conundrum. So at the beginning, we've decided not to have video games like Grand Theft Auto, even though they're super masterpieces, but we might open it up. But you realize that all these different discussions make it so much more interesting. They're very questionable, they're open for debate, and they make our position much more fertile also for communication, as was the choice to show the video games without any nostalgia interference, no arcade cabinets. We acquire all the hardware, but we try to show only the screen in the same size that it was at the beginning. For instance, for Snake, we want to acquire Snake, and we're looking at the old Motorola screen. We don't know how we'll do it, but we're thinking about it. And of course, you know, the controller, because that's part of the interaction, but nothing else. It was a choice that I thought would create a lot of trouble, and instead people in the gaming community understood this position and respected it. Once again, time will tell, but it's a way to go. The funny thing was the reaction. We were talking about Picasso and video games. So Jonathan Jones from The Guardian was the first art critic to thunder, Pac-Man is not Picasso. Okay, well, maybe in a few years, people will think that Pac-Man was like Picasso. Maybe at his time, Picasso was also considered not worthy of inclusion in the museum. But what was really interesting is that there was all this amazing and quite unjustified positioning against video games as if they were the devil and the Antichrist. And you know how sometimes when you get a bad review, you hurt, because we all hurt. I mean, I'm as thin-skinned as any of you, you know, it really usually is something that hurts. This particular time, I was so embarrassed for the guy, because no, truly, it was so embarrassing to have that position that I was not hurting. I was just like, what do I do? Nothing. But thankfully, the Guardian itself reacted, and people from the Guardian wrote a rebuttal to their own art critics saying, well, our video games art, the debate that shouldn't be like, please, you know, just like go take care of something else, because that's really not something that you need to talk about. And then John Maeda chimed in without me saying anything, and he just like said, yes, the video games should be at MoMA, and okay, great. So the whole debate was continuing, but this is one commentary that I think you, this audience, will appreciate particularly a lot. Look at the very, very bottom. I have to redo this slide because it's hard to read. It's a fascinating debate, are video games art? But the answer to the above question, are video games art, is, put bluntly, no. Video games aren't art because they are, quite thoroughly, something else. Code. Code. Excuse me. I mean, how dumb is it to say something like this? Like, Picasso's not art because it's oil paint. So it really, it's just amazing. So this brought me back. I want to show you something to tell you it's happened before. These were things where there were objects, foreign loans, to the exhibition Cubism and Abstract Art that was in the 1930s at MoMA. They were stopped by the US Customs because they would not believe that that was art. So, see, it happens, and it's wonderful to be in the position of pushing the envelope, right? You know, we talked about the great auction that Lindsay and Megan and everybody else organized at Phillips of Digital Art. More recently, there was an artsy auction of algorithm. You know, it would be interesting to discuss it with you, but because, of course, there's a lot to discuss. But it was interesting because the algorithm as an art form was introduced on the stage also, and it's something that we will discuss more in the future, but that really has to do with a need to be as open as possible to the ambivalence and ambiguity of contemporary art and design. So civic engagement and entanglement, creative encoding and incubating the arts, and trying to understand what it is that quantum computers really do. That is my quest for the next few years. And also remembering that there are professions more harmful than industrial design, but only a very few of them. This is Victor Papanek, and together with you, I hope to burn even more chairs in order to free the world from the old forms of design. Thank you very much.